Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to look at a really helpful grammar tense, the past perfect. This tense is great for telling stories, explaining events in sequence, and making your meaning super clear. By the end of this video, you'll understand what the past perfect is, how it works with the past simple, and when you should and shouldn't use it. So let's get started. So let's start by understanding what the past perfect tense actually is. The past perfect is used to talk about an action that happened before another action in the past. Think of it as a way to show which event came first. The structure is simple, had plus the past participle. Let's take a look at this example. By the time the concert began, most of the audience had already found their seats. Let's see why this uses the past perfect. I'm going to explain this using a timeline, so you can see clearly which action happened first and which happened later. Imagine this is our timeline. This is now 11 p.m. Now let's go back to the past, to the moment the concert began. Let's say it was 7 p.m. Even earlier, at 6 p.m., the audience had already found their seats. So, on our timeline, the action of finding their seats happened before the concert began. Let's see another example. I had eaten breakfast before I left the house. Here, had eaten happened first, and left happened second. The past perfect helps us make the order completely clear. That's the basic idea behind the past perfect tense. Now that we understand the basic idea of the past perfect tense, let's look at the two types of the past perfect. We have the past perfect with be and the past perfect with other verbs. Let's begin with the past perfect with be. Remember, the verb be has an irregular past participle and that form is been. So anytime we use be in the past perfect, we use the structure had been. This never changes. After had been, we typically add either an adjective such as tired, excited, or nervous, a noun such as a teacher, the team leader, or a member of the club, or a place expression such as at the station, in the library, or on the bus. This is because been refers to a state of being or a situation that existed before another action in the past. As you know, there are three main types of sentences in the past perfect: positive, negative, and interrogative. Positive sentences in the past perfect are used to describe an action that happened first in the past. Look at these two examples. She had been tired before the movie even started. They had been at the park before it began to rain. These two sentences are positive. Now let's look at some negative sentences. Negative sentences in the past perfect are used to show that an action did not happen before another action in the past. To make a past perfect sentence negative, we simply add not after had. Here are two examples. She had not been tired before the trip. He had not been the leader of the group until last year. Now let's look at two examples of interrogative sentences or questions, as they're sometimes called in the past perfect. Had she been tired before the meeting started? Where had he been before the party? In all these examples, had been tells us about a state or condition that existed first before another past event. That concludes our section on the past perfect with be. Now let's take a look at the past perfect with other verbs. Again, we have positive sentences, negative sentences, and interrogative sentences or questions. To make a positive sentence in the past perfect, use a subject plus had plus the past participle plus the rest of the sentence. Look at this example. She had finished her homework before dinner. Now let's see how to understand it. Had finished. This is the past perfect, the action that happened first. Before dinner. This is the simple past event which happened later. Here's an important tip. Think of a timeline. The past perfect action happens first, and the simple past action happens after. This helps show the correct order of events clearly. Pay attention to this. In the past perfect tense, the word had is always used, no matter what the subject is. This is different from the present perfect where we use has with he, she, and it. Alright? Look at these examples. I had finished my homework before dinner. He had left by the time I arrived. They had already eaten when we got there. So we never change had for different subjects. It's always the same with I, you, he, she, it, we, and they. Now, to make a negative sentence in the past perfect, use this structure. A subject plus had plus not plus the past participle plus the rest of the sentence. Here's an example. He had not eaten breakfast before he went to school. Where's our past perfect? Had not eaten. It shows that the action did not happen before another past action. Before he went to school, this is our past simple, the later action. Next, we'll look at interrogative sentences, also known as questions. When we make a question in the past perfect, we change the word order by putting had before the subject. For example, she had finished her homework becomes had she finished her homework? When answering a past perfect yes/no question, we usually give a short answer first, then the full sentence if needed. For example, had she finished her homework? The short answer would be yes, she had, or no, she hadn't. For WH questions, the structure is a WH word plus had plus the subject plus the past participle plus the rest of the sentence. And don't forget the question mark. We use WH questions to ask about the earlier past action in relation to another past event. Common WH words include what, where, when, why, how, which, and who. Take a look at these examples. What had she done before dinner? Where had they gone before the movie started? Now let's talk about contractions. Contractions are a way to make your sentences shorter and more natural, especially when speaking. In the past perfect tense, we can contract both positive and negative forms. Using contractions doesn't change the meaning of the sentence, it just makes it sound smoother and more fluent. In positive sentences, we sometimes contract had with the subject. The structure is a subject plus apostrophe D plus the past participle. Look at this example. She had finished her homework can be contracted to she'd finished her homework. The contraction apostrophe D replaces had in positive past perfect sentences. In negative sentences, we contract had not to hadn't. Look at this example. He had not eaten breakfast can be contracted to he hadn't eaten breakfast. Note that there are no contractions in questions. Now let's talk about the types of verbs we use to form the past perfect: regular verbs and irregular verbs. Understanding these is important because the past perfect always uses the past participle form of the verb. For regular verbs, the past participle follows a simple pattern. But irregular verbs don't follow a pattern at all. That's why it's important to memorize the past participle of each irregular verb so you can build past perfect sentences correctly. Regular verbs are the easiest to work with because they follow a clear pattern. To form the past participle of a regular verb, we simply add ed to the base form. Examples: work becomes worked, play becomes played, clean becomes cleaned. When we add ed to regular verbs to form the past participle, we usually just add the letters E and D, but there are a few important spelling rules we need to follow. Number 1. Verbs ending in E. If the verb already ends in an E, we only add a D. For example, live becomes left, dance becomes danced. Number 2. Verbs ending in a consonant followed by a Y. If the verb ends in a consonant followed by a Y, we change the Y to an I and add ed. For example, carry becomes carried, study becomes studied. Number 3. One-syllable verbs ending in a consonant-vowel consonant, CVC. Before we look at this spelling rule, let's quickly review what vowels and consonants are. In English, the vowels are A, E, I, O, U. All the other letters in the alphabet are consonants. Now, some verbs follow a special pattern called CVC, which stands for consonant, vowel, consonant. When a one-syllable verb ends with this CVC pattern, we double the final consonant before adding ed. This helps us form the correct past participle. For example, plan becomes planned. So what did we do here? The verb plan ends in a CVC pattern, consonant, vowel, consonant. Because it's a one-syllable verb with this pattern, we double the final consonant before adding ed. That's why plan becomes planned. Another example, stop becomes stopped. And what about this example? The verb stop also ends in a CVC pattern, consonant, vowel, consonant. Because it's a one-syllable verb with this pattern, we double the final consonant before adding ed. Number 4. Two-syllable verbs ending in a CVC pattern with the stress on the last syllable. If the verb ends in a CVC pattern with the stress on the last syllable, we also double the final consonant. For example, prefer becomes preferred. The verb prefer has two syllables and ends in a CVC pattern, and because the stress is on the last syllable, we double the final consonant. So prefer becomes preferred. The same is with the verb occur. Occur becomes occurred. Now, the situation is different with the verb open. Open is a two-syllable verb that ends in a CVC pattern, but the stress is on the first syllable. This means we don't double the final N when adding ed, because the stress falls on the first syllable, not the second. So open becomes opened. Now let's look at irregular verbs. Irregular verbs don't follow the regular ed pattern. So their past participle forms are different. Each irregular verb has its own unique past participle, and unfortunately, there's no single rule to form them. That's why it's important to memorize them. Examples: go becomes gone, see becomes seen, take becomes taken, write becomes written. Now, let's look at how we use time expressions with the past perfect. Time expressions help us show the order of actions when we have two events in the past, one that happened first and one that happened later. By using words and phrases like after, already, as soon as, before, by the time, just, once, and until, we make it clear which action happened earlier and which happened later. This is very useful for storytelling or explaining sequences of events in the past. Now, let's look at some examples with each of these time expressions. Our first example uses the time expression after. She finished her homework after her brother had called her. The earlier action is her brother had called her. We use the past perfect to show this happened first. The later action is she finished her homework. This happened after the past perfect action. Now, an example with already. She had already eaten dinner when he arrived. She had already eaten dinner. This action happened first, before he arrived. He arrived. This happened after she ate. Now, let's look at an example with as soon as. He had left the office as soon as the meeting ended. He had left the office. This action happened first. The meeting ended. This happened right after he left. Next, we'll see how before works in a sentence. Look at this example. She had finished her homework before her friend arrived. She had finished her homework. This happened first. Her friend arrived. This happened after she finished her homework. Now let's see an example with by. She had finished her report by 5 p.m. She had finished her report. This happened first, completed before 5 p.m. By 5 p.m., this indicates the deadline or later point in time. Now here's how we use by the time in a sentence. She had left by the time he arrived. She had left. This happened first, before he arrived. He arrived. This happened after she left. Now, here's an example with just. She had just left when he arrived. The word just emphasizes that it happened a very short time before the next action. An example with once. Once he had finished his homework, he went out to play. Once shows that the later action only happened after the first action was completed. Finally, let's look at these examples with until. She hadn't eaten until her friend arrived. Until shows that the first action was incomplete or hadn't happened before the second action. Another example, they had lived in Paris until they moved to London. Which action happened first? Living in Paris. And which happened next? Moving to London. Perfect. That's it for today's lesson. Keep practicing your English every day and try to use the past perfect tense in your own sentences whenever you can. The more you practice, the more natural it will feel to talk about actions in the past. Remember, making mistakes is part of learning, so don't worry if you don't get it perfect at first.